Hi, I'm Ben.
And I'm Josh.
And this is the Bad at Magic podcast, a podcast about games, life, and other things. Welcome to episode 7 of our bi-weekly chats, or as my son calls it, Two Dads Talking.
Two pretty lame dads talking, depending on the subject matter.
Okay, last night we took our family out to the local high school's drama production of a play they call Puffs. It was new to me, but in the realm of Harry Potter fan fiction, apparently you can avoid intellectual property battles by creating something where you just don't use any of the recognized names, even though it's all very recognizable. So there's this play called Puffs that's about Hufflepuff House. And our 3 main characters are all people who go to Hogwarts and get sorted into Hufflepuff at the same time, the same year that Harry Potter does, but we follow their life and their adventures through.
Oh, that sounds like an interesting play or an interesting idea. I think it sounds even more interesting because like most of the time you go to high school productions and it's just something you've got to suffer through.
No, but that sounds amusing.
It sounds like they can make a game for the parents of like, try to find all the intellectual property rights breaches.
Well, it was so chock full of Harry Potter pop culture references. I mean, the books, the movies, the fan fiction, the memes, anything you can think of surrounding the Harry Potter movie universe got sent up in this production. But the only reason I brought it up is because at one point in talking about the members of Hufflepuff House, or Puffs as they were called in this play, they used the phrase "bad at magic," and I dug it.
Ooh. That seems like one of the only places where people would talk about being good or bad at magic.
Right, that isn't in the context of Magic the Gathering.
Dude, what's funny is you always see like the nerds walking around with like the shirts like, I'm in Hufflepuff, because nobody wants to be in Slytherin, that's all the bad kids. Nobody wants to be in Gryffindor because that's all the people that actually have to do stuff. But I always associated more with the Ravenclaws, just because you never hear about them.
You would think so, but in my house, we have proud members of all 4 houses. My daughter Samantha, the youngest, who is Machiavellian to say the least, is a proud member of Slytherin. We went to the park in Florida and she wanted a Slytherin shirt.
I mean, there are those people out there. I would keep my eye on that if I were you.
I am.
That's, you know what, like the last podcast we were talking about how you don't get those clear spikes in like normal social behavior to determine how your kids are developing. That might be one of those flags you want to take notice of.
Yeah. She's only 9, but she had a fight with her mother this afternoon where she yelled something like, "Why don't you just let me lead my own life?" I'm thinking, I'm going to hear that again in 5 years, and it's really going to be terrible.
If she's saying it now, you're going to hear it every week for the next 5 years.
Oh,
that's so. Where do little kids get this level of drama? That's just ridiculous. My son said something like that the other day, and I can't remember. Like it was one of those things. Like he said it with the right inflection and tone, but he clearly had no idea what he was talking about, and so we just played it off as funny. But yeah,
they're experimenting with language and culture, and they want to do something they probably saw somewhere else, and they do it poorly, and it's really funny.
Well, and it's clearly they're copying it from somewhere. I just want to know where it came from. I think it was something like, "Oh, hey kid, you want to help me build some stuff in the garage?" He's like, "No, that's destroy them all." And he said it with like that maniacal, evil genius tone, and like I couldn't help but just start laughing at him. Like, no, we're not going to destroy.
But you didn't know where it came from.
I have no idea where that came from. No. So apparently your kids listen to it because it's 2 dads talking.
My son, my 18-year-old son said that. That was his tagline of our podcast, 2 Dads Talking.
Interesting. Did he say anything that indicated he actually listened to the podcast, or did he just like
Absolutely.
Read the title?
He talks to me about it every time. He says, "Dad, I listen to a lot of podcasts that are kind of like yours, but what makes yours different is the fact that it isn't just 2 guys talking, it's 2 dads talking."
Do dads just usually not have enough time for podcasts?
I guess. Maybe that's the case.
Maybe we're bad at magic. Maybe we're bad at parenting because we should be spending this time that we're investing in the podcast into our kids instead of instead of talking about how we're doing so well.
We aren't taking our time to do things like make hot stoppers or do, animated videos of our podcasts on YouTube.
Again, that's a reference to the Hello Internet podcast. I want to make sure we cite all of our sources because I don't want those guys getting mad at us because I have nothing but respect for them.
Me too.
All right. So what is on our agenda to talk about in our lucky episode number 7?
Well, last week we talked about the speculation and economics surrounding a mythic planeswalker called Oko.
Yes. The investment of Magic the Gathering cards. Now, we don't have to go in depth on that again, but I do want to revisit it just because of the updates that have happened. And maybe people are interested in how this all plays out.
Sure. We'll keep it short, Alicia, I promise.
Yeah. I preface that before I start talking. We're going to keep it short, everybody. I guess we're going to keep it short, everybody. So basically what's happening is, like we talked about, this one card is kind of warping the world around it. And there was another Mythic Championship, another big pro tournament last weekend, and it was even more warped than it had been in the past. Something like approaching 70% of all of the decks that were played there were decks built around Oko. And then the top 8 players, they usually do, it's a ladder tournament, and so the top 8 are the people that you really pay attention to. 6 of those decks, so a full 75% or whatever that works out to be, I should know that, were Oko decks. So it's looking more and more, and everybody's talking about how there is no way that Wizards, the manufacturer of this game, can get away with not restricting the use of this card by banning it and say it's no longer viable or legal to play in tournaments.
Go ahead.
I just want to tack on, which would then destroy its current value.
I listened to some other speculators that are much more engaged in the community and have a lot more involvement in this kind of thing, basically say that all of this stuff we're talking about isn't something that's going to happen. It is happening. Meaning the price fluctuations we're seeing right now are all taking all of this speculation, tournament results, and all that stuff into account.
Yeah, and that's a principle in finance. I think they call that it's a perfect market, where the market reacts instantly to all known information.
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. So basically, the manufacturer has 2 options at this point. Both of them are bad. The first one is they would ban this card, which needs to happen because it's so bad for the game. But they're hesitant to do that because of all the financial reasons. Like, this is a brand new card. People are spending a lot of money trying to get it. And there's reasons that they don't want to. But the other one is...
They've already banned it once in a different format.
Did they? Which for? Oh, what was that, Pioneer or something?
Yeah.
Yeah, well, okay. I guess that's probably their toe in the water of seeing how mad people will get by getting rid of it. Yeah. Well, the only other option they have would be to try to destroy his value by banning cards around it that make the rest of the deck viable, which I don't think is a good idea.
No, and that's not going to happen.
Yeah, well, I guess, so for everybody's knowledge, the price of Oko has been dropping in anticipation of it getting banned, so poor Ben is probably stuck with cards that he overpaid for. Aw, sad face. But we won't know for sure until 2 days from now, so we'll be sure to have a very short segment on the next episode to explain what happened.
One of the things that happens on our podcast that I enjoy is interacting with members of our audience. And I've had this weird thing happen to me. You'll have to tell me if it's happened to you. It's happened at least 4 times where I'll walk up to someone that has some headphones on and they'll turn and look at me and they'll start, like kind of jump. And I'll be like, what? And they'll be like, I'm listening to your podcast and it's weird to have you walk up on me while I'm listening to your voice. And there you are.
So you obviously have a lot more listeners like in your immediate proximity than I do. That hasn't happened to me yet.
Huh. Well, maybe it will. I had a guy that got out of his car from his morning commute, and then I saw him right after he got out of his car. He was like, that was weird. I came in the room, and my son had his headphones on. He looked over at me. He says, I thought you were talking to me, but you weren't. It was you in the podcast.
No, I have a different kind of weird experience with the podcast, and that is my wife, Nicole, will ambush me with things that I said in the podcast after the fact. Like, I think the other day we were like between picking up kids at school and driving to the grocery store or something, and we're just on the freeway, and it was quiet for a couple minutes, and then she's like, oh, by the way, you misquoted me.
Oh.
When? Like, oh, on the podcast, you said this, and I actually said this, and it's ridiculous that you do that. Like, well, I'm sorry, sweetheart. I do the best I can.
Yeah. It's much more boring to say I don't know.
Right. And I don't know. I'm going to do better making sure that if I do quote her, that I do a better job getting it right. That way she won't be mad at me.
Well, one thing that happens to me sometimes with Alicia is she'll come up to me and she's like, you only told part of that story. I'm like, what do you mean? She's like, there's more of that story. I'm like, well, I don't know the rest of that story. So I want to tell you another part of a story that I told you before. So I told you a story about how my sons were playing outside and they took some fence boards that had fallen off a fence and some bricks and they created a lever and a fulcrum and made a brick catapult.
That's the best part of the story. Like,
right.
What other part of that story could exist?
This is the Paul Harvey, the rest of the story, from like a chicken soup for the soul kind of angle. So I was TDY, which is military speak for not at home, for whatever reason. I can't remember. My wife and I tried to piece it together and I couldn't, but I wasn't at home when all this went down. So you're
essentially on a military business trip.
Yes. So she's at home with 4, maybe 5 little kids. Again, something else we couldn't figure out in the timing since we had a lot during that period of our life. And the second kid comes running in the house to tell her that this first kid is outside bleeding because of the brick catapult. And she was in the process of cooking dinner. So I think she was browning some hamburger or something, and she took it off the burner and turned off the stove and ran outside, and my son was bleeding. So she threw all 4 kids in the car and drove to the emergency room. So the rest of the story is, since she couldn't call me and have me come rescue, she was in the emergency room with the oldest, who was 6, which meant the next was 4, the next was 2, and the next was brand newborn. So she had a baby and 3 kids under the age of 7, all at the emergency room there at Langley Air Force Base. And what comes to happen in the chicken soup for the soul part of this is just the way that the military community looks out for each other. So she had a friend that she'd made an appointment that was going to be coming over, a good friend of ours still, who's a lieutenant colonel in the reserves. She was just a captain at the time, and she'd come over to the house to check on Alicia and just see how she was doing since I was out of town. And she wasn't there, and she'd never stood her up for an appointment before, so it was kind of unexpected. And she glanced in the window in our carport and could see the food sitting there on the stove, like half cooked.
Oh, geez.
So
okay. She went in and finished the meal and then ate it.
She could have just given up at this point, but she was like, no, something's not right. I better look into this and see if I can figure out what went wrong. So she saw the neighbor outside across the street, and she's like, what's going on? She's like, oh, Alicia went to the hospital with the kids. She's like, oh, no. So instead of just like going home or I don't know, we were still in the dark ages with our cell phone situation. Anyway, she went to the hospital. Alicia's in the room, and the doctor's like giving the diagnosis. I think he ended up super gluing the cut in my son's eyebrow shut. But she showed up there at the hospital, and they weren't done yet, and she was like, oh my gosh, let me help you. And she took the 2 middle kids, left my wife with the baby and the oldest, and took them home and fed them dinner.
Aw. You see, that's those heartwarming stories that you do, and that is chicken soup for the soul.
It is. It's nice. It's nice that we have a community of friends who are looking out for each other and who'll go the extra mile in a situation like that.
Dude, what's funny is this is another illustration about how you and I are different and how we see the world differently. Because you said, like, oh, there's another part of the story they need to tell. And immediately my brain went to, oh, I want to hear, like, I immediately concocted the version of the story that I wanted to hear. I wanted to hear that your son had this catapult constructed for weeks and that he was holding tournaments to see how far they could launch different things. And, like, there was this huge, like, elaborate following. Like, I wanted this to be like this whole giant thing before somebody got hurt and then it found out and was shut down. But no, your story is much more, like you said, chicken soup of the soul.
And instead I gave you a cup of cocoa. I get it.
It's like, oh, cocoa's great, but I really wanted that whiskey.
Yeah. There's a lot of challenges that go along with military life, as I'm sure you know. And your unit can help look out for you to some extent, but really it's your friends and neighbors that help cover it, at least for your family at times like that when you're away from home and somebody's in need.
Ben, you make me just want to find somebody and give them a hug.
Aw,
like this.
That's nice.
You're just such a wholesome person. Thank you so much.
You pretend that you aren't.
I'm definitely not.
But you'd written down that you want to talk about playing games with your kids.
Ah, dang it. That's such a great transition, and it just totally obliterates my image as not a great person. Yes, I did write that down. So that was one thing that I think will be interesting for us to discuss because, like we said, this is a podcast about games, life, and other things. And one of the majority of the other things that we talk about is our kids and parenting. And so why not marry up two of our supposed recurring topics of games and kids? So this whole, the fundamental thing, and this is probably one of the few differences my wife and I have when we talk about raising our kids, is the TV and video games. Because she, from my perspective at least, she might, she needs to, if her opinion is not this, then I'm going to leave it up to her to correct it in the Reddit or on the Facebook or wherever. But from my perspective, it seems like she kind of equates TV and video games as the same kind of brainless screen time. And we do try to limit our kids. They get time where they get to do it. And then there are days where we say, no, we're not doing screens today. We're going to do other things and read and, play with Legos and do that stuff.
I get it. There's definitely that feeling of lumping anything you're doing where you're staring at a screen together into one big group and just calling it screens. And for the most part, I support that mental shortcut.
It is a mental shortcut, but I keep trying to drive this little point home. I agree that screen time, like that genre, should be limited. But at the same time, if they're allowed screen time, from my perspective, I would prefer that they were playing video games rather than watching TV.
Definitely playing games or something where you're interacting is, not all screen time is equal.
That's the point that I wanted to make, is that, TV is a completely 100% passive medium. You sit and then you absorb the story that you are told. And there's nothing wrong with TV. Sometimes you just want to sit and be fed a story and listen to a story. And I listen to audiobooks. Sometimes I just want a good story. Other times, though, I want to be more engaged. I want to be more interactive, and I want to use my brain. And I think video games they're more. You're going to get more out of a game, even developmentally, hand-eye coordination, maybe. But just the fact that you have to think and make decisions, you're exercising some part of your brain that you're not exercising when you're watching TV.
I would definitely concur with that. And even amongst the genre of video games, if you just have people sitting around looking at a screen with a controller in their hand, there's still lots of different levels of interaction. We have a few games that we've deliberately sought out and gotten that are very family interactive, Rock Band is a great hit in our family to just get everyone involved and doing something interactive. Oh, yeah. Technically, we're staring at a screen, but really it's more like Family Band. We also have this game, I think, called Use Your Words by Brentalfloss, the guy from the YouTube channel, where it's like interactive Mad Libs where everybody takes an iPad or an iPhone and it'll give you a riddle or an old-timey movie clip and then have you give it a funny caption or fill in the blank, and then it reads everyone's answers anonymously, and then you score the best ones and the winner with the highest score. Fun, interactive, laughing family games.
That is cool. The technology integrates to make that possible, because I can see a paper version of that being a lot more complicated to pull off.
Yeah. And there's another one called Kahoot, which I think is used a lot in classrooms. I started using recently, and I liked it so much that it's just an online website where you can set up a multiple choice quiz, but then anyone with a digital device can go to the website and you can log in and do a real-time quiz where it'll show the 4 multiple choice answers up on the screen, and anyone that's logged in can answer, and at times who answers the fastest and gets it right and keeps score. So what I did is, before our family reunion back in July, I made up 3 family quizzes. There were 20 questions each about things about members of our family. So it was nicknames, stories, embarrassing facts, those kinds of things. And then it would be a question which person of our family can point out Venus in the sky anytime, day or night? And that's my dad, of course, because it's his superpower. Even if it's on the other side of the Earth, he can point through the Earth to the position of Venus in the sky.
Oh, hang on a second. How do you verify that?
You would be astonished. Anyway, it was
that's not an answer. You can't verify that. I can point to Venus right now. It's that way.
You can verify it. He just knows in 3-dimensional space. It's like Venus is orbiting around him.
I don't buy it. I'm going to need to see a lot stronger evidence than an anecdote.
He's worked at a planetarium for the last 20 years.
This sounds like a trick that a dad does to a little kid, and you just never got in on the other side of it.
No. No way. My dad knows where Venus is anytime and every day.
Don't you dare take this away from me.
Yeah, so that's another time where you would say, oh, look, they're all just looking at a screen. But the technology and the accessibility has improved to the point where it's an analog for something much different. I mean, this is like playing Red Rover, but nobody's going to get hurt. We're looking at each other, we're laughing, we're getting to know each other, we're interacting, and technically we're playing a video game.
Man, you had some really good examples, honestly, when you're talking about that stuff. Like the Rock Band, that's great. That's not that's a group activity. That's rhythm. So you're working on musical skills. It's also music appreciation. Maybe these kids have never heard or would never listen to these songs on their own. But usually those Rock Band games have a really wide selection of really good music.
Yeah, I love it.
That's good stuff. Like we're not at that stage yet because my kids are still younger, but we are. Slowly introducing some of the more basic and simple games to them, and it's fun to see them like click through all the steps that you do when you're learning games.
Well, that's something to look forward to when they get older, because I always say I love having teenagers, and that's the kind of thing that's really fun.
Oh, I'm still waiting. Like, there's going to be a day when my son asks me, it's like, hey, Dad, what is this Dungeons and Dragons that you play? And like my brain is going to go on high alert. Because I imagine like the inside out people inside my head, like half of them are going to be freaking out. And this will be the person in charge, right? Everybody calm down. We've got one shot at this. Then you got to play it cool. It's like, oh, well, it's a paper and pencil RPG. You just kind of calmly explain it and like try to like reel them in slow like you do with the big fish.
Well, video games aside, there's other games we play with our kids, I think, when we're trying to be good parents and turn the screens off.
No, yeah, I've got my daughter just got to the age where she understands. Like she can act. Most games we play with her, she'll drift off and she's gone, and then my wife is the third and the fourth player. But we started doing Go Fish, and Jane actually understands the principle. That's a little kid version of
Go Fish. So like you have one of those cutesy decks of cards with the little pictures of fish on it, or like you're playing with face cards.
Okay, and that's the next thing I was going to say, because there's no way she would be in if it was just regular playing cards. No, it's one of those fancy cute ones where it's undersea animals and they're different colors.
Okay.
It's like, do you have an octopus? And then, or, oh yeah, here's my octopus. And it's fun because she understands the game enough where she asks somebody a question, and if it's a yes, then she gets the card and she gets to put them down and she's happy about it.
So many great developmental things you can see in those situations.
Yes, because my son he is 8, and I'm seeing him put together, like if my wife asks for a seahorse and then it's his turn next, then he asks her for the seahorse.
Right. So he's starting to
figure it out.
Yeah. But your daughter doesn't get that yet.
Nope, not at all.
Yeah.
Which is fun and cute. So that
we talked about that when you were talking about them playing rock, paper, scissors. About how he can't just guess her pattern because she's chaos. Yes. And you know what's funny is that chaos works both ways, because he uses it to his advantage too. And that's for another game we play. Usually him and we play Battleship occasionally. And Battleship is great because it's a mathematical game. Like you can optimize and use deductive reasoning and logic to optimize your strategy. But it does not matter how much of my brain I dedicate to optimizing this game of Battleship. That freaking kid will randomly guess where all of my ships are every time. That's the worst. You're like, I am using the optimal algorithm for defeating you. And he just wipes you out with a couple of lucky guesses. And that's the thing, is he's just all over the place. There was a couple of games I started tracking his shots. I'm like, he's doing something, but he's not. He is just shooting randomly all over the freaking board. And he'll hit one of my ships, and then he'll zero in on that area, like you do. You get a hit, and you can figure out which way it's going. He's good enough to know that at that point. Yes, that he gets one hit. He needs to work around until he sinks the ship there, and like that's it. Like, and it just snowballs from there. It's like, oh well, he got my two hit ship, so that's basically it. It's game over, man. One interesting aspect of gaming that came out of my family is when we merged the two family cultures of our previous lives of my wife and I. So she came from a house where she had some very stickler for the rules kind of people. And in my house, we were more just freewheeling, house rules, have fun kind of people. Like, I don't think I've ever played a proper game of Monopoly according to the rules of my life. which is why I still enjoyed it until I met my wife.
Well, then you're not supposed to enjoy Monopoly. I think we've mentioned that before.
I know. We have, and somehow I was, which meant I was doing it wrong. So my wife and I, when we would start to play games together, she was like, well, that's not how you do it. I'd be like, well, so what? But, she wanted to follow the rules, and we'd do our best. We'd play games with the kids, and I think we've both come around a little bit. I know the rules a little bit better now, and she knows when to just kind of chill sometimes. One example is Uno. If you really play according to the rules, that game's just kind of rigid and brutal and not very much fun. But if you laugh and have a couple of house rules and stuff like that, it's a good time.
That is a good example. We play Uno with my son sometimes, and I feel like it doesn't matter how many times I've read the rules. Like, I don't quite get the exact perfect interaction that it's supposed to be. But we have played a couple of very strict to the rules games, and they can drag. Like, they can just go and go and go.
Yeah, I think that's an important aspect of gaming. Is unless you're really playing and the stakes are high, you're playing for like a poker bracelet or something. You have to be willing to be a bit flexible at the expense of the purity of the game in order to allow for more fun.
I'm landing somewhere between you and your wife, and here's why. I agree with Alicia that you need to know every rule of every game backwards and forwards. But I believe that because you have to know the rules and understand the game in its entirety before you can start deciding which rules to ignore and which rules to change. Like, if you're going to not obey the rules, you need to have clear reasoning why you're not doing that.
I'd kind of agree with that. I had a problem growing up. I was the oldest of 6 kids, and we frequently went to family reunions where my parents' siblings had similar bursts of fertility. And there would frequently be a group of 20 children trying to play a game of some sort. Kickball, something where you have this big group of children, and the lowest common denominator is always the youngest kid that is going to cry if you don't let them play. And I was, as you've pointed out time and time again, when I game, I tend to gravitate towards victory. I want to be a Spike. I wanted to play the purest version of the game. If we were playing football, I wanted to play real football. I didn't want to play fake football where we just touch each other with one hand. I wanted to tackle somebody.
Yeah, but that wasn't safe back then because you just had the leather helmets and the pads were terrible. You shouldn't be playing football back then. Well,
my dad would always kind of tone me down when I would do this. I would, the youngest kid would come out and they'd be like, "All right, everyone, let so and so get to first base or whatever," and I'd be like, "No, that's not how you do it," and I'd peg him in the face with the kickball, and my dad would pull me aside and talk to me, and I started to realize that I just needed to be okay with this. This was going to happen. There would be times in my life where it would just be, the turkey bowl and everyone was still at home and it's just the dads. And then you can play ugly ball, and hardcore full contact tackle. But the rest of the time you got to play down to the little kids. And that can be fun too. You just have to change your expectations for what the experience is going to be like. And that has been my experience gaming as a father. Just change your mind about what the experience is going to be like.
Set the guy who windmills slammed a winning card against his 9-year-old in the finals at F&M. Josh. Sometimes you just need to adjust your expectations.
You just go for it.
Right for the throat. No, sir. You don't get to take the high ground on this one. I don't think so. You and I both know you still eviscerate your kids when you get the chance.
So I can't always suppress those urges. I'm going to take this in a completely different direction. So one time we were playing Uno with the whole family, and every time we come to my fourth child's third son, he would kind of scratch his head, and we'd be like, "Ammon, it's easy. You just play one that matches the color or one that matches the number." And we thought he was doing okay. And a couple of times he played a red card on top of a green card that didn't match the number.
Oh, he's colorblind.
Yeah. But it took us a minute. You nailed it right away. You saw where I was going with this. But imagine that you didn't know that, and you're just like, "Is my kid dumb?" Like, "Oh no, I haven't done it."
I nailed that, I think, because Nicole and I are still a little worried about our daughter Jane, because like for the longest time, like we'd say, oh, what color is this? And it'd be red. And she would go, oh, it's green. Like, no. She goes, oh, it's red. And because we know red-green colorblind is a thing. And
right, so you're saying she's not colorblind, she's just dumb?
No, we don't know. Jury's still out, frankly. Okay. We've done the thing where you pull up like Google image searches for the colorblind test.
The dots. My dad
the dots and the numbers.
He's like, the only thing in the world I can't do is those stupid dot tests.
What's always fun is you get the couple that don't have any numbers and you show them to somebody. It's like, hey, can you read the number in this? Just to mess with them.
Right. Yeah, that's a whole thing. So my son, we were like, oh my gosh, he's colorblind. So then we got out the dot test and gave it to him, and sure enough, he was. And it's been kind of interesting knowing this when he's young, because I don't know, it's just changed things a bit. I was also surprised that Uno wasn't a bit more disability friendly. If I ever just get around to a letter writing campaign to Parker Brothers or whatever, I'll let you know how that goes. But
oh my goodness, put that on the list. Just put that on the list of crusades that Ben Rich is going to fight.
Yeah, so we ended up going through the deck and just putting textures on one of the colors to kind of fix the problem, the red-green problem.
That's an interesting way to take care of that. I wonder if they're... Yeah. And you got me thinking, and I'm actually looking for it. And yeah, there's one right here.
A handicap-accessible version of Uno?
Yeah, it's a Uno color ad. Is that it?
Huh.
Colorblind accessible Uno. Yeah, there you go.
Okay. So we weren't the first ones to notice this and tell them it was a problem. Why is that hard? Like, they could do that real subtly in the very next printing of it. Just add a little bit of texture to the color that, like cross hashes on one and then dots on the other, and it wouldn't even have to look that different.
Well, yeah, I'm actually going to send you this. I'm going to send you this link because it looks like exactly the same.
All right, we'll put it in the show notes.
But up in the corner, it has... Yeah, it's got little symbols that then they have a Venn diagram on how they overlap. It's pretty clever.
I wonder if they know that their card game could be the first time you learn that someone's colorblind.
You can start using that as a diagnosis tool.
Yeah.
You see, one more way.
Doesn't know how to play Uno. Yeah,
this is one more way that games can improve your life, listeners. So if you're, I tell people this all the time. Games are like wine. If you don't like it, that's because you haven't found one that you like. I mean, there's such a wide array of games and wines out there. So also, listeners, if you don't drink wine, just try wine. It's good too.
I'm going to make a cat poster, a little image macro of your quote there. Games are like wine. If you don't like it, try a different one.
Yeah. Well, and
that brings this...
I want to tell this little story because it was a super cute moment that we had. I had a real father-daughter moment. We downloaded a little game on the Switch. People probably heard of it. It was blowing up the internet for like a couple of weeks. It's the Untitled Goose Game. Have you heard of that?
Yeah, and I think it's 15 minutes or over.
Oh, probably. But I bit hard. I spent $10. I downloaded Untitled Goose Game, and I'll tell you what, like, it's awesome. It's worth $10. I'll tell you that. You just get to play as a goose and harass all these people in this quiet little village somewhere. And we had this great moment because I was laying on the couch one evening, playing as a goose, trying to untie this kid's shoes and steal his glasses. And my daughter was like lying on the couch next to me, with like her arm on her head on my shoulder. And then, like, I tripped the kid and his glasses fell off, and she started yelling, "Get him! Steal his stuff! Steal his stuff and run away!" And my wife is like, "What are you two doing?"
This harmless game about a goose in a village is turning your daughter into, like, a sociopath. It is very subtle in the way that that's exactly what it's doing. I mean, just because you're a harmless-looking barnyard animal doesn't mean you aren't just... It's not just Grand Theft Auto in disguise.
No, I'm laughing so hard because if my daughter turns into a sociopath, this is going to be the last thing on the list that caused it.
It was Untitled Goose Game. That's what it was.
No, I'm the other end of the list. Like, there's so much stuff that we do that's going to make her a sociopath before the Goose Game. No, anyway, Goose Game's great. I'd recommend it for people with kids. It's really easy. It's good. It's awesome.
Okay. So I picked out a couple of words for bad at English this week, but I changed my mind because this week we'd chosen to review the Netflix series Living with Yourself with Paul Rudd because the actress in it is a girl named Aisling B. She is Irish, which very curiously I found in the series that it never comes up. They never bring it up or address the fact that she has like this thick Dublin accent.
Well,
not once.
That's for our discussion that we're going to have later about the show. But like, does it need to come up? Like, she's Irish. That's why is that a thing?
I like that. I like that in our time of multiculturalism and globalism, we can have something as thick as like an American living in the Midwest married to an Irish woman, and no one ever brings it up. Like they didn't even notice. Because it's very noticeable. So I enjoyed her performance enough in the show that I Googled her and found out that she's a stand-up comedian. And I found this delightful clip where she's on some interview show with some British interviewer who was interviewing her, and they were having a little moment, the two Brits with the two people from the islands with the Yank in the room, where they were having a laugh, and they discussed the word ghee. Ghee is an Indian word for clarified butter. It's a class of clarified butter that originated in ancient India and is commonly used in Middle Eastern cuisine. But apparently in Belfast or Dublin, it also means a vagina. So that was the point of discussion, and Paul Rudd was duly embarrassed, and the two Brits had a good laugh, and I don't even know why that came up. So
You kiss your mother with that mouth? Good Lord, Dan.
Our British word of the day is ghee, which means clarified butter.
It means clarified butter. That's exactly what it means.
That is what it means.
That's funny. Like I'm imagining you watching what is that? An English talk show with two Irish people speaking on it. Like, was any of it like understandable? I mean, I guess you lived in England, so you probably understood.
They have a British television show that's very much the equivalent of Jerry Springer called Jeremy Kyle. And this is the kind of word you can imagine people on that show, shouting like "kick her in the ghee." Like,
oh, jeez. That's excellent. Okay, I'm glad. You know what? I am glad that our bad at English segment isn't always the lofty, like corporate speak that you'll use in fancy office buildings. We got to bring it down to the common man sometimes.
Next time you're saying ghee, I hope it's in the term of cooking in the kitchen.
I don't even know what clarified butter is. Like, is that salted or unsalted butter?
You've done this before. I don't know if you've ever had a recipe where you just take some butter and you melt it, and it kind of separates into two parts. The like real transparent light yellow part, and then the like cloudy lighter yellow part.
Am I supposed to keep those separate? Because I was just whisk them back together.
Right, but if you were to, you can go to the store and buy ghee, which is just the clear part.
Is that the good part of the butter or the bad part of the butter?
I don't know. It's used in cooking in India.
Well, there's a lot of things that are used in cooking in India that I don't necessarily want to bring into my house. So that's good to know, though. That
is one interesting aspect of British culture, like how you might say, people in the Western or Southern United States eat Mexican food, but it's become so localized that it doesn't represent where it came from. The national food in England is curry. Which is Indian.
What, really?
Yeah, it just shows how intertwined their cultures became during that period when it was empire, that they brought back this cooking from the Far East that was so interesting to them that they just adopt it. And you can, if people say British cooking is boring, that's because they're talking about like mushy sausages and mashed potatoes.
Yeah,
but
they're talking about bangers and mash. That's exactly what they're talking about.
But every town in England has at least 3 curry places where you can get good Indian food, the way you can go to any town in Arizona and find 3 Mexican restaurants with good Mexican food.
Well, and this is my wife, the history major. I hope she backs me up on this. She'll probably correct me when she's listening to this. But no, I mean, there was like entire wars fought over trade routes because the British were so hard up for pepper. I mean, how bland does your food have to be that you're going to start a war to keep your pepper coming in?
Yeah.
So, of course, the British national food is something that they stole from another country.
Like everything else.
Like everything else.
So bad at English. The British word of the day is ghee.
Love it. Love it, love it. So, all right, I'm going to bring up the next stuff. You mind if I talk about it?
No, go ahead.
So this is something that I put in the notes and I wanted to talk to you about, because on the last show, there was a point where I brought up some topic and then you went and immediately started Googling it. Oh, I think it was the price of Oko or something. And I could hear your keyboard going. And I noticed that your keyboard sounds incredibly different from my keyboard. And I think you probably just have like a normal like laptop keyboard that you're typing on.
It's like the $15 model you can buy at Walmart. It's HP branded. It's external to the laptop. I have a USB keyboard. I also have like a mechanical keyboard downstairs with the very sharp clicky sounds, but I'm not using that one right now.
And that's what I was going to bring up, because I don't know if you can hear that, but I have a mechanical keyboard and I love it to death. And my wife hates it.
She doesn't like it.
Oh, she hates it to death. And it's funny because I was thinking about the other day I caught myself in my office just clicking my pen for no reason while I was sitting thinking about something else. And I'm starting to think that maybe I just really like the clicking noises. Like maybe there's something about my brain that I just really like and are reinforced by my pen clicking or my clicky keyboard that I love. It just my mouse, sometimes I'll randomly, if I'm reading something online, I'll just be clicking around the page, not clicking on anything, but just clicking to hear the clicks.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely, psychological studies and stuff have shown there are certain sounds or smells or things that are just kind of naturally pleasing to people. And if they really study, like, I don't know, the cycles of brain waves or something and find out there's something harmonic about them. But I noticed when you and I were at Grand Prix Vegas a couple of months ago, and you were keeping your life total on a life pad, you had a clicky pen, where you click the pointer in and out. And every time you would record your life total, which is, dozens of times per match, you would click the pen open, write your life total, and then click the pen close again, and then set it down. And there was no reason functionally why you should have had to do that, but every single time without fail you always opened and closed the pen before you wrote a change on your life total pad. I'm
honestly surprised that's the only clicks that I put into that pen.
Yeah, you weren't picking it up and just clicking it mindlessly, but you always opened it and closed it like there was some function that served cognitively for you.
Well, you see, and there you go. This has only been drawn to my attention recently, because my wife has always been driven crazy by the fact that I click, but it wasn't until like a couple of weeks ago I was doing it. She's like, "You have got to stop." I'm like, "Stop what?" She's like, "You are clicking the mouse just all over the place while I'm trying to read this site." And I realized that I was doing it and I didn't know why. And the more I thought about it, I think I just like the clicking noises, Ben.
And I think there's a certain extent to which we just tolerate things about people that bother us. If you go on the internet, you think just everybody hates everyone for little tiny things like the way they sound when they chew or whatever. But I think for the most part, we all have our own quirks, and so do other people, and we just get along by not mentioning it. But like you said, if you're with somebody long enough, eventually it's going to come out.
Now, we need to edit out that last little caveat that you put in there, because I want my wife to listen to this and say, "Hey, Ben said that you need to just put up with my clicking."
Oh, I gave her an escape clause.
Yeah. Well, that's standard you. It's like you're going to say the thing, and then you're going to say the nice thing to smooth it out, so everybody's happy at the end.
Hooray! It's my poop
sandwich. Hooray!
Well, but see, the things about me that bug people are like the kind of stuff that isn't just small annoying, it's big annoying, and then they blow up and we have a fight.
Oh, let's talk about that. Can we talk about some of the big things that annoy people that you do?
Well, I'm sure you probably had some of this like at the academy where they just put you in this pressure cooker where you're close together with people you might not necessarily have chosen as friends, and you have no choice but to interact with them. And then
hang on, are you talking about your family now?
Kinda, but I chose them, and I get to raise my kids. But what first came to mind when you asked me this question about things I do that annoy people is whenever, about every 4 to 6 years in the Air Force, they send you off to a leadership school where you're away from home for, 2 to 3 months, and you're going through something very disconnected from your usual job where you're just learning to be a leader. And so they'll send you out and you'll do, like a field exercise where you're pretending to be in combat, or they'll send you do an obstacle course. And the object isn't so much to complete the obstacle course as it is to practice and demonstrate leadership skills. But the problem is when you're practicing and demonstrating leadership skills at one of these courses is everyone you're leading are peers.
Well, and that's the biggest problem.
They're not subordinates. They're not practiced at being subordinates, and they don't look at you as someone superior to them. So
and the worst part is it's not just like, oh, you are supposed to demonstrate leadership, but they're not saying that to you. They're saying that to the entire class, and then they're trying to rack and stack who is the best leader amongst all the people trying to lead at the same time.
Yeah, and there's a little metagame there going on of, this everybody vying to be the alpha person to get the top ranking, which will have impacts the rest of their career. But I'm mostly not talking about that. So what you'll do is a handful of, you'll do a writing exercise or a field exercise or a classroom debate or those kinds of things. And then after a couple of weeks of this, then they'll pass around a stack of index cards and ask everyone, okay, now everyone, let's talk about Ben Rich. Everyone write on this card for the next 5 minutes some leadership feedback about Ben Rich. And then they pass around. And I still have 3 stacks of these index cards from these kinds of things. Oh my goodness.
Ben, you would be that guy that would took out these stack of cards like quarterly and review them.
I mean, it just right to my soul. I can't.
Oh, it can't. Okay. So this is like the YouTube comments. You just don't read the comments.
No,
it doesn't matter.
Somebody on YouTube doesn't know you. They're just being a jerk.
Do you think these guys? You think these guys knew you?
But here's the thing, Josh. I have never had one of those classes be the same, and those people always write the same thing.
Ooh. Well, okay. Then, I don't want to back off my point of you're fine just the way you are. But I mean, if you do keep hearing the same feedback over and over.
Yes.
So are we going to talk about some of this feedback you got?
Okay. So probably the biggest one is the fact that right before I joined the military, I was a middle school teacher. And my practical experience and my education up to that point was in how to educate and lead and direct children.
Honestly, that is probably the best preparation you could have gotten before becoming a United States Air Force officer.
I know, but that's great when you're like a captain and you're leading a bunch of airmen basic that just barely graduated high school and you're like their 13th grade teacher. But if it's a bunch of other college graduates that look at you as a peer and you're trying to lead them, you got to do something different because they do not want to be treated like middle school students. And that's what they wrote on my feedback forums. You treat us like middle school students.
Well, hang on. You were probably 2 decades older than all of those idiots. They were fresh out of college and just their collars were still popped and their aviator sunglasses were still on, talking about the beer pong tournament.
They still didn't want me to talk to them like that. All right, I'm going to tell you a story. I may have told you this story before. Okay, so there's this activity at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama where they hold both the basic training that I went to and the squadron officer school that I went to, where you go there and there are these really diabolical obstacles. And imagine this giant warehouse full of segmented partitions of concrete with pools of water and steel stanchions, and each one is about 40 foot by 20 foot square, and in it there's some type of physical task you have to do. So you'll have a group of people in it.
Yeah, I don't want to take over anything, but you're talking about the leadership reaction course, right?
You got it.
Okay, and so for our listeners who may or may not be in the military, if you've never done an LRC, they're great because it's basically like you imagine those little mind teaser puzzles where it's like 2 bent nails, and if you twist them in just the right way, you can pop them apart. Now, imagine if you took that idea where you have this little puzzle and there are certain ways that you have to solve it and then blew it up to this giant physical activity that requires 10 or more people to accomplish. That's what we're talking about.
Yes. And each one is different. It's a different little thing you have to do it. There's one where there's this pool full of water and there's little concrete, what looks like coffee cans sticking out of the pool of water, and you have 2 boards and 10 people. And you have to get all the people across the pool without touching the water, and the boards are different lengths. And the coffee cans are different distances apart, and so you have to go the right direction and squeeze everyone onto the board and move the board at the same. It's fantastic.
It's super fun, but it's complicated by the fact that all 10 of those people are trying again to compete to be the alpha leader.
Visibility and position, yes, but for the most part, I think at least my class. I don't know what yours were like, but my class kind of recognized that if we just work together as a team, we can all get our chance to shine. And so people were generally relatively cooperative unless they were filling out a 3x5 card with feedback on it. So for each of the, if there's 10 people in your group, then you're going to do 10 rotations. And for one of the 10 rotations, you're going to be the person in charge. And the rest of the time, you're a subordinate. So be a good subordinate when it's your turn to be a subordinate, and be a good person in charge when it's your turn to be the person in charge. But I cannot suppress my inner Spike. So we got our obstacle, and what it was this 15-foot tall wall with a bar pointing off the top of it, suspended over the top of a pool that was like 6 feet deep. And it wasn't warm weather when I was there. So you didn't want to fall into this pool. And the task that we had was to get the entire member of the entirety of the team over the pool, over the wall. And we had some ropes and some logs, and the bar that was suspended over the top of the pool was hollow inside. So what we could do was basically lash the poles together in such a way that they would go inside of the pole that was suspended over the pool, and then climb up and then pull the members of the team up and over the wall. But what I saw immediately, as soon as we started this, was that in order for the device that we were going to have to construct to get the first person up to withstand one person's weight and then allow for the rest of the people to come up, it needed to be well constructed. Like, you can't just kind of do it lazy with it, wrap the rope around a couple of times and tie a granny knot, and it wasn't going to work. It would have fallen apart and somebody would have fallen in the pool. So I kind of immediately I pulled the team to see if anyone had the kind of background I did. I'm an Eagle Scout. I'm like, does anyone have any experience with pioneering? Because we're going to need to do a square lashing with at least 4 wrappings and 3 frappings and a good cleavage.
I constantly forget that you were an Eagle Scout, and like, what Eagle Scouts are ridiculous. Like, was it your graduation, like your last badge, they dropped you in like the wilderness in Canada somewhere and expected you to build like a small condo?
Yeah, that kind of thing. I asked this question, like, can anyone do this task? Because I wanted to delegate it and do all the leadership things, assign roles and get everyone ready and stuff like that. And I get blank stares. My whole team just utter blank stares. And I'm thinking, great, we're cooked before we even started. Because if we don't tie these 2 logs together right, this whole thing fails. It was just that kind of task. I said, all right, I know how to do it. You hold that end of the log. You hold that end of the log. I'll do the tying. And I did it good, and I did it tight. And we had 7 minutes, and I think it took 4 minutes for me to tie this thing.
Oh, jeez.
Now, imagine you're one of the team members during those 4 minutes. There was some unrest.
And that's the problem, is because they see, like, if you don't have the understanding of the structural engineering that this thing is going to require, then all you see is some guy jockeying for position, taking control, and wasting a bunch of time when you could have had this thing tied in seconds.
Yes, that's exactly what they were all thinking in their head, because they didn't know how to do it in the first place. So they look at the task and they go, oh, he's just whatever. I don't know what story they told themselves about me, but they're like, he's wasting time. This is just one guy doing this when we could all be working this problem. So 4 minutes it took me to tie this thing. We had like 3 minutes left to get everyone over the wall. I kid you not, Josh, it took us 60 seconds to get everyone over that wall.
Wow, very nice.
I finished tying it. I stuck it in. I climbed up. We pulled the first person. We pulled the second person. Everyone was in position. The thing was strong. It held all the weight. We got everyone over the wall. 60 seconds to spare. No penalties. And
it was still a loss for you because people were mad about it.
And my feedback from my team members was brutal. Brutal. Which broke our pact that we'd made. At the end, we huddle up around the leader, and he's like, all right, everyone, how do we feel about Ben's leadership? So pretend you're a member of my team now and give it to me.
Yeah, that's I've been in those situations before where people ask for immediate feedback, and like in the moment, like you do the nice thing where you say, it's like, oh, well, it was fine. Everything was good. And you can kind of swallow it because of the face-to-face interaction. But then later in the written forms, you just eviscerate them. Like, oh, well, I'll tell you what I feel about Ben Rich's leadership.
So they didn't. I don't know why, but they didn't do the hold back, because I thought we had this like unspoken pact that while the teacher's there and asking us about the leadership, we all say, yes, I think he was good because of this, or I think he was good because of that. It was just, well, he wasn't leading. He didn't direct us. We just stood around for a long time. And I'm sitting there thinking, guys, we all made it over. Like, We solved the problem.
Passed the
Everyone
test.
made it over. We had time left over. Like, what's the problem? But I just failed to evaluate the task. The task wasn't to get everyone over the wall in the allotted time. The task was to do all the things that we've been studying in class that look like leadership. So we went to the next obstacle, and the helicopter pilot in charge, I think we lost 3 people died. They didn't finish before the end, and his feedback was glowing. Oh yeah, what a great leader. And I was just seething, so pissed. I still haven't gotten over it.
See, that's one of the reasons I got out, because the Air Force trains you to think that a good leader is somebody that loses 3 people and doesn't accomplish the task, but makes everybody feel good at the end of it.
And that's it. That's what happened.
Ben, I'd rather follow you into war than the helicopter pilot that would get me killed trying to
all right,
cross
stand there for 4 minutes while I tie these knots.
It's like, damn, that sounds good. Can I have a drink too, sir? All right, so that was
talking about clicking pens, and I ended up back in Maxwell Air Force Base in 2007.
Yeah, no, I feel kind of bad. I brought up something that's like, oh, I do this thing that slightly annoys my spouse. It's like, let me tell you about this PTSD I have from people critiquing me about my leadership ability.
Oh man,
sorry, Ben. I don't think I have a good enough story to tell you. Oh, I'll tell you what. How about this one? This one paints me as a bad person. So. Recently, I changed careers again for the umpteenth time. And as a part of that, I had to sell my old business, right? And so we went through, I didn't have the skill set or the ability to know how to do a transaction that large, because it was, tens of thousands of dollars that I sold this business for. And so I hired a broker. That's their whole thing. Their whole job, 24/7, 365, is to buy and sell these businesses. And I thought she would be way better at it than she was. She was awful. She was just the absolute worst. And I won't say her name. But at the closing, we sat down. It was me, I sat, and then the buyer on the other side of the table. And we're signing all the final paperwork. And she hands out these critique forms. She's like, oh, and just so you know, there's a critique here. And then if you have any feedback for me, I'd love to hear it. It's like, oh, yeah, that's great. And I immediately folded it and put it away. And then she's like, oh, well, no, you can fill it out now. I was like, no, I'll fill it out later. She's like, oh, no, just go ahead and fill it out now. I'm like, fine. And I was so done with this.
Was she part of a larger business where this form was part of her completing the transaction and she had to turn it back in to show that it was done to her supervisor?
So it was kind of like a real estate setup where she's an independent agent but works in an office with a group of people.
I got it. So this form wasn't optional for her.
Right.
It wasn't just she wants to know what you thought. This was part of her completing the transaction.
Right. She needs this for whatever reason that they have, for the metrics or for the bonus split or for whatever. She needed it
and
back.
You wanted a chance to tell her what you really thought, but not in front of her.
Right. And so she made me fill it out in front of her. And so I filled it out mostly fine. And then the one thing that just I couldn't give her the most, there was it was one of those, she was absolutely outstanding and needs improvement on the other side. And one of them was communication. And I cannot articulate how bad this woman communicated, because there was multiple times where I would call her with a simple question. And then we'd be she would talk in a monologue for 10 minutes, rambling about her personal life and then other things that were happening in the business and how busy she was. And I swear every time then I had to okay, so in summary, I asked this question and you gave me this response. Is that correct? It was so bad. I had to sum up my one question with her at the end of every phone call because I wasn't going to get the information otherwise.
Okay.
And so I put,
but you of course don't do this ever. And this was the first time you ever do this, so it's like getting a bad real estate agent right out of the gates. You don't know until it's too late that you've got a bad one.
Yeah, exactly. I'm vested in this person. It's
right.
I'm too deep. I just have to just do the best I can. And this is
express it in terms of economic impact. Now that the whole thing's over, how many tens of thousands of dollars do you feel like her incompetence cost you?
So she didn't cost me any monetary value. I don't think.
So it was just stomach lining.
It was stomach lining. It was stress. It was Oh, you know what? No, I think going back, she probably did cost me $2,000 or $3,000 or maybe up to $4,000 in not communicating to me certain aspects at the end of the deal. Now that I'm thinking about it, you're right. That was not articulated to me very well.
So she's lording over you because doing that makes you write higher things on the form. Military movers do the same thing because you have to turn in the form so they stand there and watch you fill it out. And you couldn't give her full marks.
I didn't because I'm one of my traits is I like to pride myself on being honest. Like the truth will set you free, but first it's going to piss you off.
Filtered honesty, but yes, honesty.
It was very filtered honesty, but I got to that one, and that one I couldn't sugarcoat. My brain would not allow me to give her anything other than needs improvement, communication. Okay, and so then
wait, what were all the points on the scale?
It was like 1 to 5, and for communication, I gave her a 1. Okay. Yeah, absolutely. Everything else was like 4s or 3s, like the standard. Like, oh, she was fine.
Sure.
This one was I can't. Like my hand physically wouldn't go any farther to the right. Like it's got to be a 1.
I'm imagining you like Bruce Campbell in Evil Dead.
Yeah, with my other hand on my wrist trying to shove it over and it just won't go. Yeah. No, but then I filled out the one and I gave it back to her, and then we proceeded with the rest of the deal, talking to the buyers, and we both had the same experience with her. So whenever she was out of the room, we would just kind of roll our eyes and laugh about it. But then, and this is the last thing. I'm trying to be nice about it by giving her good marks, except for the one thing. And then we leave, and I'm like, oh, we're done, and we're wrapping up, and I'm on my way out. And she's like, oh, actually, can I talk to you for a second? I'm like, oh, sure. And she pulls me off to the side, and she's like, so I see on the form that you gave me a needs improvement for communication. Is there any feedback or anything else that you want to talk to me about that? And it was one of those things, like in my brain, I'm like, just be nice. I'm like, well, there were some times when the phone calls were a little tough and the emails, it just try to be a little clearer and a little more concise. That's all. She's like, well, I mean, what do you mean? I think I was doing just fine. And then started rambling at me right then. And I hit a threshold. Like there was some critical switch that was like, again, I'm imagining the inside out people in my head where there's the polite person, like the social etiquette person,
and the red
holding
guy comes
back
up and elbows the joy out of the way and takes the controls.
No. The social etiquette person was holding back anger this whole time, and then she starts rambling again, and the social etiquette person gave up. It's like, you know what? Go ahead, have at her. And I told her, it's like, okay. Oh, I almost said her name. Okay, miss, let me tell you what I think. And I just and that was it. Then her diatribe was over, and it was, oh no, she wasn't there. And she would have stopped me, probably, okay. Or walked away or disowned me or something. But for about 5 minutes, I didn't get angry. I didn't start yelling at her or anything. But I was very forceful with my, let me tell you what I think, and here it is. And she was very done after that. It's like, oh, okay, well, thank you for your feedback. Thank you. Right. And then we left. We parted ways. Wow.
It's interesting to think how just some random stranger that just the cosmos paired you with probably cost you a bunch of money. And I hope maybe that feedback's useful to her. She didn't see it that way. I'm sure it was just checking the box on her corporate execution process.
Yeah, it probably was. And that's the thing. This is why a younger version of me lashed out all the time. I was very obsessed with justice, just the idea and concept of justice in the universe. Well, this isn't fair, and I'm going to draw my sword and I'm going to fall on it and make sure that this injustice does not go unnoticed or unheeded. But that burned a lot of bridges and crossed a lot of people the wrong way, and it caused me a lot of problems as a younger person. And so, as I've matured and aged, I think one of the better changes that I've made in my life is I try to let a lot more of that stuff go. And so I tried legitimately to just let that one go, and it didn't work. I could not control it. And finally, I don't know, maybe she just asked too many times. You know what I mean? I'm trying to hold back, and the third time you ask, okay, well, you want the truth, here's the truth.
Yeah. I'm going to give you that one. I think it's good that you didn't. Sometimes people need to hear it.
It's not going to change anything.
That you got a booger hanging out of your nose because they don't want to be rude, then you just walk around with a booger hanging out of your nose all day.
That's true. I don't know if... or the other thing is you just resent the person that told you had a booger. How dare that guy tell me I had a booger in my nose? What a jerk.
I mean, sometimes when I go back and look at those stacks of 3x5 cards, sometimes I'm like, I don't really do that so much anymore.
Ben Rich, sir, I'm going to tell you right now, you need to burn those 3x5 cards for two reasons. One, you're just fine the way you are. The world is a better place with Ben Rich than it would be without Ben Rich. One.
Thanks, buddy.
Two, if you're getting the same feedback, years separated between these courses, that's just who you are at this point. Are you really going to make like massive changes to your personality and style to affect the feedback that you get from random strangers that were just jockeying for position?
Okay, I'm going to get way too real here for a second, but only just barely. I am on the tail end of probably the closest I've probably been to feeling depressed in my life, because a year ago I was passed over for promotion, and then the following year I was passed over again, and those represented my two best chances, and I basically have reached a dead end in my career. And I've had to come face to face with a lot of those kinds of things, those feedback cards. Like, if I'd listened and made more changes, could I have prevented this kind of gut check evaluation of yourself?
Oh, and if Alicia had taken this class instead of that class, would you have married a completely different person? If you had PCS to this base instead of that base, would you have had a completely different boss and career path? You can't ask yourself.
I get it.
I
mean, there's the chaos theory, but there's also kind of a cone of that, 30 to 40% of people that did get promoted, where I was somewhere on the periphery of that. And in the past, there were different choices I could have made in the choose your own adventure we call life, where I would have ended up inside of the cone instead of outside of it.
All right, so you put me in. I have two responses to this. One is utilitarian and one is touchy-feely. Which one do you want to hear first?
Give me the touchy-feely first.
Okay. Well, the touchy-feely version is, do you trust yourself? Like, I'm asking you the question.
Okay, I think this feeds really well into the Netflix living with yourself. So I'll go into do I trust myself when we talk about that.
Okay.
We'll say it depends.
Okay. Well, I make it a point that I am a competent, intelligent person. And I have to assume that past me, while was less experienced than I am currently, he made the best decisions that he could have made at the time that he was called to make them. And so when you think about those little the chaos theory, the juncture points or the splitting paths that are in your past, you can think like, oh, if I had done this differently, everything would have been different. But then you have to remember, like, you were the person making those decisions at the time. So you have to assume, like, if you trust yourself, that you made the best decision that you could have. And so, like, sometimes it just doesn't shake out the way you expect it to. That doesn't mean it's bad. Like, you made the best decisions as you could. And the other, all right, so this leads into my utilitarian version of this talk, is like when you are actually forced to leave the Air Force, how many years will you have served?
20.
And will you be receiving military retirement at that time?
Yes.
So you, sir, having served a full 20 years, giving up to your country and receiving lifelong retirement benefits afterward, you see that as a loss? Like, you see that as like your career is over? Because I feel like that's just like it ended sooner than you wanted it to, but it still ended in a good way. Like, you're receiving retirement, the country is thanking you for your service, and you're receiving a paycheck after that. Dude, just like, just wave, bow out.
Hang on. I'm going to give you a not so fast here, because I had a year time period before they'd announced to me the results of the continuation board, where that was not certain. High year of tenure for a non-prior service major is 18 years of service, which means they can force you out before you're eligible for retirement.
So there was a year where they could have like booted you, or they could have told you they were going to give you the boot before that thing happened.
Yes. So now I know for sure that there was a subsequent board that was held that made a determination that even though I wasn't determined to be eligible for promotion to lieutenant colonel, that I still can continue beyond 18 years of service to reach 20 and be eligible for retirement.
So there was a group of people that asked themselves, like, okay, we're faced with this list of people that are not going to be promoted. Are they bad enough to warrant kicking out and screwing over? And they said no to you. So you should count that as a win.
Right. I get that. And I can get to the sanguine place that you're talking about, but there's also the death of the expectations of the other possibility. The becoming a squadron commander, of, potentially competing for even higher rank, of having more responsibility, of being taken seriously for my ideas, of being able to try out some of the things that I've always wanted to try and practice in real life that I'll never get a chance to.
All right. Again, the touchy-feely version is when God closes a door, he opens a window. I'm sure there's going to be plenty of opportunities for Ben Rich to alter the universe in a positive way because that's just who you are. The utilitarian version of this is life sucks, get a helmet, you'll be fine.
This was the most seriously I've had to go through the 4 or 5 stages of grief.
It's 5 stages.
5 stages in a long time. I really had to do them all. I don't do the anger thing very significantly. I'm not like really. I'm not like.
I might have said "darn it" twice and dropped a spoon.
Yeah, I'm Ned Flanders when it comes to that kind of thing, but it wasn't. Yeah.
That's funny. No, listen, and I might be coming off as kind of crass, but I feel for you. But I honestly, I do appreciate the difficulty that you're going through making this transition, and all the good luck to you. But I'm not worried about you in any shape or any capacity. You're going to be fine, sir.
Thanks, Josh. I appreciate it. I knew you'd support me. You fall in that very very reliable inner circle of people that I knew would be supportive of me no matter what. My mom, my wife, my siblings, a few other close friends that know me well and appreciate what my qualities are and stuff. But man, the people who make these decisions about my life, all they see is this pile of paper that has a few flaws in it, that missing some critical indicators or whatever, and they just make these decisions about me, and it feels so personal, and it's hard not to take it personal.
You are better off, honestly. Like the military is not a place for truly exceptional people.
I'm getting to where I can tell myself what you just said. I'll be all right.
Yeah. All right. Let's get out of this touchy-feely nonsense.
Okay.
That's just
I like this though, because this feeds right into what this is why I think this show on Netflix resonated with me so much, and why I asked you to watch it with me. So Paul Rudd plays this guy that at the beginning of Living with Yourself. Who's kind of like right into his midlife crisis. I don't know what age he's supposed to be, 40-ish. And he is in his job, and it starts off like the opening scene of Joe versus the Volcano with Tom Hanks, where he's staring at a fly, flying into a window going bzz, 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 and he just looks at it with his dark circles under his eyes. We come to find out that he and his wife are struggling with infertility. They've been trying to have a baby and they can't. They kind of just, they aren't having sex. They just kind of look at each other mournfully and give terse or short goodbyes. They don't seem to enjoy anything in their lives, and it's just kind of miserable.
Yeah, they're just in a tough place, and I think everybody's been there at one time or another, especially people that have been married for a long time. You go through slumps like that.
So at this point then we introduce our sci-fi twist that facilitates this becoming a television show. He has a buddy pass him a business card. He goes to this clinic, and they clone him.
And the whole premise is that it's like his buddy came back and he was just like positive and upbeat and had all this energy. He's like, "What happened? Like, you were just as depressed as I was." "Oh, you got to go to this spa, and it's great, and it's sold as like a day spa. Like, you're going to go there and you're going to feel like a new person." And turns out you are a new person. They are cloning they're taking a cloned version of you, and like it's implied that they're kind of like sprucing up the DNA, like kind of turning everything up to 11 to like, this is the best that you could possibly be.
Yeah.
They're putting all your memories into this new clone version of yourself, and then they're offing the original and burying them in shallow graves in the forest.
But they don't tell them that, and they kind of hint at this while the process is going down, that their machine that they're going to use to off him kind of malfunctions, and he ends up waking up in the woods covered in plastic in a shallow grave, and rushes back home to find his cloned self about to go to bed with his wife.
Right. The clone version, and the show does a great job because it's a 20-minute show. It's 8 episodes, and it seems like every episode they switch perspectives to a different character.
Yeah, I like that as well.
It gives good appreciation, and then also lets the pace of the show really it flows really well, because like the first episode is all taken place from who I'm going to call Old Miles, the original, the guy who went to the spa in the first place because he was going through this midlife crisis.
Yeah, he wakes up in a shallow grave in the forest and is like, "What on earth is going on?"
Right, but then episode 2 shows everything that happened to New Miles, the clone, from the moment that he woke up in the spa with all the memories of Old Miles over the same period of time. And so at the end of the second episode, you see old Miles coming up to the house where new Miles has just finished this glorious day, rediscovering his enthusiasm for life and his spouse and his marriage and everything.
Yeah, and this is where Paul Rudd really gets to shine. I mean, like he's driving home and he puts his head out the window and then he stops the car and runs through a cornfield and he meets a farmer and starts picking apples and goes home and kisses his wife and then shows up at work like this and revitalizes his career.
And this is, I wrote in the notes, on my part of the note, the top bullet that I have is Paul Rudd is an American treasure.
Like he certainly is.
Like it was, like I appreciated him as an actor because he's in all the Marvel movies, right, as Ant-Man, and he does a great job in those and all the other movies that he's ever been in. But this show really brought it home for me that this guy has serious acting chops.
Oh, yeah.
Because he's playing, this is like, there's a lot of movies where somebody plays two different characters, but this movie, or the show rather, he is playing two versions of the same character. It's the same person, the same memories, the same life, everything. Just one is depressed and one is not. And it is so visceral, like just the little tiny things that he does, the way he carries himself or the way he says things.
Yeah, it was convincing. I didn't ever find myself noticing it. Like, it felt like it was two different people.
It felt like two different versions of the same person. And it was just so... And there was... All right, so... Yeah, we are going to... All right, so if you haven't figured out by now...
So there's one point where he is the second person pretending to be the first person.
Yes, and somehow he pulls it off, like, convincingly. I'm watching that scene, and it feels like... the second version playing the first person. It doesn't feel like he just switched back to playing the first person. It felt like the second guy playing the first guy.
So I saw this brilliant interview on YouTube of Hank Azaria, who is the voice actor who plays, a dozen or so of the characters on The Simpsons. Okay. And they were reminiscing about Mel Blanc, who was like the original voice actor who played like Daffy Duck and Elmer Fudd and Bugs Bunny back in the Looney Tunes days. And they all talk about him in this like reverence. And they said the one thing that Mel Blanc could do was that he could do one of his characters doing an impersonation of one of his other characters. Or no, one of his characters doing an impersonation of the other character, and then the other character doing an impersonation of the first character, and they're all different. And then they played a clip of this, and you heard him doing it, like Daffy Duck pretending to be Bugs Bunny, and then Bugs Bunny pretending to be Daffy Duck. And it boggles my mind. I mean, it was awesome.
Yeah, the mental space that you have to be able to put yourself in, where you're wrapping, personalities over personalities, and they are, like you said, in that scenario, most people, it would turn out sounding the same. If it's Bugs Bunny pretending to be Daffy Duck or Daffy Duck pretending to be Bugs Bunny, like... somebody that's not as skilled, it would come across as exactly the same thing.
Right. But that's what Paul Rudd pulled off in this thing. That's how good his acting was.
That was my top bullet takeaway. Like, if you like Paul Rudd and hate sci-fi, still watch this show because it was amazing.
So his wife in this, Aisling B., Irish comedian, as I mentioned earlier, was a revelation to me. I'd never seen her before. Once I went and Googled her and started watching some of her stand-up, delightful. She's fantastic. And she's great.
Yes, she is also very great in this show. And this is I guess we have to talk about this because the show sounds like the first episode sets up this sci-fi twist of there's two versions of the same person, one that's kind of depressed and one that's new and fresh and energetic and optimistic and everything's going to be great. And there's that struggle in the first and second episodes where they're trying to basically rectify or reconcile the fact that they both exist in the same space. And I thought that was going to be the show, but no, they blow right past that. Like, oh, well, they just established and deconflicted and it's fine. The show is about the conflict that this introduces into the marriage. Honestly, that's like the 90% of what the show is about.
So you would say, I was just about to ask you that question. So you would say the central theme of the show is the conflict in the marriage.
It is. It's the conflict in the marriage, and it's the inherent conflict of... like the new Miles, it's not a younger version of him, it's just a better version of him. And so that's the constant question that keeps happening is it was just so interesting to watch because you kept, like, I was convinced from the outset that one of these guys needs to go away and then the other one will just be the person. And I kept expecting, old Miles to like recognize new Miles as the best version of himself and to try to achieve that, to like, well, if I like, he's just me, I could be this, and to try to step up and like start to be that. And there's like glimmers of it, but then it keeps falling off and he just stays the way that he is. And then new Miles is just trying to be, he just wants any part of it. He finds out that he's the clone. And so he kind of takes this sidekick status, or in his mind or in the life, but he wants it. He wants to have everything that the old Miles had, and he's just trying to work his way into it.
Yeah, and he's mad at the old Miles for being depressed. He's like, don't you see how good you got it? I mean, you got a beautiful wife and a good career. At one point, the clone yells at him. He's like, why don't you just grow a pair? You know, like, just buck up, man. Take it on.
Yes, and that's so when you said, like, I asked you if this is multiplicity or like a serious thing, and you put it at like an 8, like, I think you undersold it. I think there's some very subtle but very powerful ideas that happen throughout this thing. And like, I had, like, at the end of every episode, my wife would be on the couch like, oh, that was pretty good. And I just have both hands on my head like, oh, this introduces so many ideas that are blowing my mind right now.
Okay, so I want to take issue with something you said a second ago, because you said that old Miles was the depressed, terrible version of himself, and new Miles is like the better version of himself. And I thought that, but I've watched this twice now, and just like The Sixth Sense, it kind of rewards subsequent viewings, and there's hidden facts from the beginning that the cloned version of him isn't strictly better.
Well, it's better in the surface level expectation, the way that you would immediately assume
he's
that he's
happier.
Better.
He's easygoing. He's forgiving.
He's energetic. He embraces life. He's looking for new opportunities. But like you said, that doesn't always make everything work out in that way, because there was a section of that where he's trying to date his wife, the woman. And it just doesn't work out. Like, and she's just not into it.
So there's one object lesson that I think is kind of gone over quickly, but I keyed in on the second time. And that is that old Miles had this dream of writing a screenplay. He'd started it, he'd been writing on it, he'd working on it, and he just, either between depression or busyness with work, he hadn't spent any time on it, but he had this aspiration of some point of coming back to it. And at some point, new Miles finds it and starts trying to fix it and changes it significantly. And old Miles is mad about it. Like, how dare you? You're ruining it. And old Miles' idea of what would make a good screenplay is probably similar to how his personality has become. World-weary, a little bit depressed. And new Miles' version is that it should be spunky and energetic and upbeat. So my question for you is, which version of the screenplay do you think would be better?
And that's... You have to qualify it. Like, I think new Miles's version would have made more money, but I think old Miles's version would have been more intellectual, more subtle, and more impactful in its long-term ramifications. But this introduces the idea that my wife and I struggled with. Like, when we were both watching this show, like, the underlying theme, and like I would want to argue with her about it. Like, what are you talking about? Because she would say something. I'm like, that's not what's happening. And it took me like 3 or 4 episodes to figure out that she was viewing old Miles and new Miles as 2 completely distinct, separate people. And I was viewing them as just 2 copies of the same person. So like I kept saying, is there any version of this show where the wife doesn't go with new Miles and old Miles just like offs himself or something? That's what I was gearing myself up for. Like, the wife is going to go with the better version of Miles and not feel any guilt about it because it's the same person. And then old Miles is just going to go away like he was supposed to. And
when you delve into a concept like this, these high science fiction kind of things where there's a couple of technological jumps that aren't possible and may never be possible, there's like a million different ways you could go. I mean, I don't know. Did you ever see The Sixth Day with Arnold Schwarzenegger back in the 90s?
I did. That movie was terrible. But,
it was, and it's because of that. There was a few of these things where they just, would hit the reset button over and over. Yeah,
it introduces a lot of problems. I think this one handled like they really yada-yada'd over all of the science aspects of it, because that's not what the show's about. The show's not about the technology. It's about Miles and his life and his life choices and his marriage.
Right. I think they dwelt too much. For as short as the episodes are, I think they dwelt too much on the technology. Spend too much time talking to those 2 guys at the clinic.
Well, I think they did. That was a good storytelling mechanic, I think, because it put old Miles and new Miles in a stressful situation, and you got to see how the 2 handled it differently.
Yeah, because it was safe to go before those two people because they knew about the cloning thing, and then you could see how they both handled the same situation differently.
Exactly.
I didn't realize that. Good insight.
The best part of that was when they were trying to get into the place and the door was locked, and they're both banging on the door at the same time. And then some guy, just like some homeless guy, walks up and says some crude thing. And then old Miles, like they both Miles speak at exactly the same time. And new Miles goes, "Sir, please." And then old Miles just goes, "F off." And like it's just the perfect illustration.
That's a great illustration of the difference of these two iterations of Miles.
Exactly. And so I think that was the purpose that served.
There were also times, at least 3 that I can think of, where something happened that provoked an instant reaction and they both reacted the same way. So while these two were different in, the energy and the freshness, they're also very much the same.
Yes, because they were the same person. There was they were driving to the clinic to figure out what was going on, and they were quizzing each other to try to verify. Okay, is this really a copy of me? And new Miles asked old Miles, "Oh, who was your first kiss?" And old Miles "Oh, it was," and he's starts snapping and doing that thing where you know the name but you can't remember it. And then new Miles "Ha, you can't even remember." And then he starts doing the same thing. "Oh, it was," and then old Miles "Yeah, not so easy to remember, huh?" And they both go through the whole same iteration with the names.
Yeah.
And that's when they both kind of looked at each other "Oh, crap, this is for real."
Yeah. Yeah. That's how they knew that he really was a clone, and somehow they'd copied all the memories into the clone.
Can we talk about just a couple of moments from the show that were awesome?
Yes, I want to do that.
It's going to spoil the crap out of it. Before we do that,
there's one thing I want to say, because I realized this on subsequent viewings. Are you familiar with the literary concept of Chekhov's gun?
I am not.
Okay, cool. Chekhov's gun is a dramatic principle that states that every element in a story, it's about the economy of the story. Every element in a story must be necessary. An irrelevant element should be removed. So elements should not appear to make false promises by never coming into play. So the idea is, if in Act 1 of a play there's a gun on the wall, that before you get to Act 3, somebody's going to use it.
That makes a lot of sense, and I can point to a couple of things. And with 8 episodes of a 20-minute show, it would have to be very, very tight. And so you're right, there would have to be a lot of that principle applied here.
So there's things that come up and you almost feel like they're throwaways. Like there's a scene in the first episode, I think, where he's trying to talk to her in the shower and her phone chirps. And it feels like it doesn't mean anything. But then you relive that scene from her perspective later on, and the phone chirp was very meaningful.
He's constantly running into their credenza, and she's always yelling from upstairs, "Was that the credenza?" And you're
so let me ask you this.
Okay.
I wrote down about the credenza that it was supposed to be a symbol. What do you think it's a symbol of?
So the idea is it's this table, this waist-high table that's just supposed to go in a hallway with a drawer, and she stole it from one of her clients that was giving it away.
Being a jerk.
Yeah. But she stole it right when they had just moved into this new big house in the suburbs. And Miles had bought the house without her knowledge and moved into it and was talking about how they were going to build a life together. And back when he was, young and still full of energy. And it was this promise that he was trying to make to her about making this life. And this was the thing that she found to bring in and contribute to that promise. And so she saw the credenza as kind of her contribution to this long-term promise that they had made to each other, that they were going to build this great life together. And he saw it as this table that he just kept running into when he came around the corner in the hallway.
Yeah, I like that. That really is what it came to represent. To her, it was the promise of building their new life together. And by the end, he's just pissed off at it because he keeps crashing into it.
By the end, him and his clone both took turns with an axe destroying the credenza. Chekhov's gun style. They introduced this credenza. It's important to one character for these reasons, not important to this character, and it became a story element.
Yeah. So there was this... So his career, as it frequently is in fiction, they like to give them an easy job where all they have to do is be creative every now and then they can make $1 billion, like 100 Hollywood movies. So he's an advertising executive that was hired at some point in the past for being creative and coming up with an ad campaign. And he won this fictional award they call the Golden Pencil, and showed that he was it. But now 5 years later, they've had a miscarriage and they can't have children, and he's lost his zeal for life, and he's depressed, and he's no longer has that creative spark that made him a success in the first place, and he's just coasting by in his job.
Right, he's got enough gravitas from having won so many of these awards back in the day that he's just kind of, like you said, he's just coasting, phoning it in.
So, but then his clone comes in while he's still buried out in the woods and goes to work one day and brings back that brilliant energy and spark and starts something new that before he even gets back and can stop him, it's kind of changed his trajectory at work.
Yes, to the point where then it's impossible for him to go back. Like in one day, new Miles was so impactful that it was impossible for old Miles to go back and even do his job.
And the thing that I was kind of shocked at is how badly he wanted to undo it. Like, he was mad at New Miles for doing this, and he wanted to stop it, but he couldn't. It had too much momentum. And this made me think of the Toby Keith song. I don't know if you know it. It's, I ain't as good as I once was, but I'm as good once as I ever was. It's kind of this idea that as you get older, you, like, lose your edge, but every now and then you can just be as good as your old self ever was.
Well, and this is a concept that I think about from time to time, and it's the idea that if Miles was to accept that New Miles created this thing, and that New Miles is basically a copy of him, that he should have been capable of coming up with this thing that was so successful.
And he's pissed off about it.
Yeah, because this is the thing. He has two options. He can accept and internalize that there's a problem with himself that he can correct with effort and time and energy, or he can blame the external factor and like, I'm fine. It's this guy. This guy is the source of my problems.
Yeah, and the irony of that is that it's him.
Yeah.
You know, it's not just some other guy, it's him, but just like you said, a better version of him. So I think that sometimes when I try to do something that I thought I still could, like I used to take piano lessons, and I was like the accompanist at our church and stuff. And every now and then I'll sit down and try to play a song that I used to could, and I haven't been practicing for a while, and I'm not as good as I was. I used to be on the diving team as high school, you know, and I've got my center of gravity has moved, if you know what I mean. I used to be quite good at calculus, and now if my kid brings me their homework, I can't quite do it anymore. So there's this moment in the show where Paul Rudd is going through this, and he's like, he gets mad at his other self for going to work and becoming, the it man again. He's like, screw you. I don't need you. I can go and I can be just as good as you. And he tries to go in one day to work and pretend to just be the guy that came up with this brilliant new ad campaign. And he almost blows it.
Yeah, he almost got fired that day.
Yeah. Holy crap. He accidentally showed porn during a meeting before their client.
That was awesome, by the way. I loved
man.
that. And then what was great about that scene was then the client called him on it. Like everybody else left, and the client came over and was like, whatever you did or whoever you stole this from, just keep doing it and do it better.
That was way too real for me, because that guy was like, I can see through you because I'm a concentration camp survivor that sold out my friends.
Spoiler alert, by the way.
Whoa!
No, like my wife and I both, like, we're just jaws dropped, wide-eyed, like, oh my god, this guy's legitimately a sociopath. But that was cool, and that guy was like a throwaway character. You never saw him again.
He came back one other time.
Oh, whatever. No, there was one scene I have to talk about.
There's a class of character in these kinds of movies, and I was surprised they didn't do it with an animal. But there's always, whenever you have someone that's an exact copy of someone else, there's always someone that sees right through it immediately. And in this case, it was three people. It was the business owner, Mr. Hilston, the farmer, Ray, saw through it eventually, and then Miles' sister.
Yeah, and not the wife. The wife had to be told.
Right.
Which is interesting. You know, you're right. Like the farmer, Ray, and that's the guy. It was this ancillary character that turned up multiple times. It just happenstance. And that's the guy who, when New Miles got out of his car and went running through a cornfield, Farmer Ray was the guy who's like, what the hell are you doing in my corn? And and it shows in a 30-second montage, they had this big bonding experience, and they were good buddies, and he took a bunch of produce home with him.
And just like Chekhov's gun, you thought, oh, that's just a throwaway. He spent a day with the farmer, and then it turns out to be a major plot point later on.
And what was awesome about that is that was the second episode that you see new Miles running through the cornfield. But in the first episode, when old Miles is running mostly naked, barefoot, trying to get home after being buried in a shallow grave, he's running through a random farmer's backyard trying to find clothes on a clothesline. And then Ray comes out and is like, Miles, what are you doing? And Miles looks at him like, what is happening? And just runs off into the woods.
Yeah, he didn't even talk to him.
Yeah, but then that throws you, the viewer, because you don't know who this farmer is either at that point.
So I like the way that you expressed it, that basically for the first, probably about the first 3/4 of this, old Miles is just in denial that he can be, like you said, he's blaming this guy like he's another person rather than like it's a image of what he could be if he just pulled himself together.
Right.
And he has a scene where he's talking to his sister who's already figured it out. And he's like, I don't get it. Why can't I be happy for once? He's talking about he's pissed off that this ad campaign is succeeding that his other self came up with. And she's like, because you didn't earn it.
Yep. It was handed to you, some external force. And so, yeah, you can't feel accomplishment in it because you didn't put any effort in.
Yeah. So right at the halfway point, his wife finds out. And it kind of sets off, I think, I agree with you, that what's the central conflict is this issue in their marriage.
Hang on, time out. I've been trying to talk about this particular scene. This was my favorite scene in the whole show because, again, it's a 20-minute show, so they've got to be concise. The wife finds out that there's two of them. She knows, everyone else thinks it's an identical twin, but she knows. She's the wife, right? And instead of subjecting us to that scene where he's explaining and there's a back and forth, they skip right to the end of it where she's standing up in the living room and they're both on the couch. And she goes, so let me get this straight. You took $50,000 out of our savings account, went to a strip mall and let two strangers sedate you? And then and that was my favorite scene because then Paul Rudd looks up and goes, well, when you say it that way. And that was that's the perfect way for that character to to acknowledge to the audience, okay, the character is up to speed and we get a little chuckle out of it.
So yes, and you'd think that would be the end of it, but later on they have a conflict again where they kind of go back to that moment where she challenges him, what were you trying to do when you took all of our savings out and were willing to throw it away? And she's like, were you trying to fix our marriage or something like that? I think it's the lowest scene for her. It's what sets the pivot point for her character arc, where he looks at her and he goes, it wasn't about you.
Yes. And that was
he was just showing how self-centered he'd become in their problems.
Right. And this big promise that he had made to her that they were going to build this life together. And at some point he had drifted from that and it was all about him again. Yeah. And that was, like you said, that was probably the low point. And that kicks off kind of the side plot where then she goes and starts this pseudo affair with New Miles. And that's, again, this is where I thought that the show was going to go. They're going to go New Miles, she's going to be happy. Old Miles is going to acknowledge that she's happier with New Miles. Everybody likes him better. He's better at his job. And then he was going to go away. But then, the show did something completely unexpected for me that was just so awesome. And it was that the marriage, or the little affair, the little fling for a couple days between the wife and New Miles just did not work.
Yeah.
And that was
so that gets back to what I was challenging you earlier when you're saying that New Miles is just strictly better. He isn't.
Well, If
I said was bad at sex,
and which is okay, that's ridiculous because if he has all the same memories as Old Miles, then he would know how it works.
Right.
But that's fine. We'll yada yada that away and just say and they kind of said well, and he said well, I've never done it before. It's well, technically that's true, but you have all the memories of having done it before. Come on.
Sure. But I think they kind of picked a class of things because they also made him bad at dancing.
No,
it's
that's actually a pivotal point between these characters that I wanted to bring up. It was not that the New Miles was bad at the dancing. It was that the wife wasn't into it. And like I thought the same thing. Like, oh, New Miles is really good because he remembers this routine that they did at their wedding, and he's super into it. And then she was like, they tried to do it in the bar, and he was being spontaneous and fun.
It takes two to tango,
right? And she was like, and they were bumbling and bumping into each other. I'm like, oh, this is awkward because he remembers, but she doesn't. But then later, she goes back with Old Miles, and Old Miles realizes, the error of his ways, and he's trying to win her back. And one of the things he does is he turns on that song, and they start
their choreographed wedding dance,
and he sucks her into it, and then they execute it perfectly, and that just keys you in. Like again, Chekhov's gun, like you're talking about with the stupid dance that they tried to pull off. That just demonstrated that it wasn't that she didn't remember or that the other guy couldn't do it. It's that it didn't work between those two, but it worked beautifully and flawlessly between Old Miles and his wife.
So we kind of jumped to the end here, but I want to rewind a bit because there was one point where right in the middle where he was just trying to negotiate with his clone to figure out how they're going to do this, because he tried to send him away and his clone just like missed his wife. And I found this kind of poignant. Like if all of a sudden if I was just free from all my commitments and sent away, would I be happy and feel released, or would I just miss everyone and everything? And ultimately that's what happens. He tries to run away, go live a new life, and all his memories are living with his wife. He didn't divorce her. He didn't break up. Why would he run away?
Not only that, but this is the new and improved Miles, right? So he has this newfound love and energy for everything that he has that exists. And so, of course, he wants to go back with her and make everything work the best. And again, the show did such a great job because she called Miles, and New Miles had the phone for some reason, and he answered, and she was just asking one of those inane questions that you get when you're married for 20 years. It's like, hey, can you pick up the dry cleaning on the way home? And he like breaks down into tears, realizing that he's never going to see this woman again.
Yeah. He was just about to run away and leave town, and she asked him to pick up the dry cleaning, and it did him in.
I'll tell you what, that hit me right in the feels, man. Right in the feels.
There was a few scenes like that. Like there was one time where she thought she was pregnant. She'd had a pregnancy scare.
Oh yeah.
And she came downstairs to tell him, and Old Miles was downstairs and he was like eating cereal, and she comes down, and it's beautiful because the camera perspective has him in the foreground with his head down, doesn't even look up. She comes into the room, her face is glowing, she's excited, and she's like, Miles, guess what? And he doesn't even look up from his cereal. He's like, what? And her face just falls, and she goes, oh, nothing. And she doesn't tell him.
Well, and I
think, whoever filmed that has been married for a long time, because I have had those kinds of interactions with my spouse before. It doesn't take a lot of words. It just takes a subtle gesture or a look or a quick interaction, and it's all that needs to be said. She wasn't going to change his mood at that point with her news, and it wasn't going to go well, and she decided she was going to save it for later.
I'll tell you what, if you're, and like you're saying, it's all the little things that can just shut down that, what would have been a beautiful golden moment for the two that could have pulled them out of this depression spiral that they had, right? And that's that's kind of the other part of this that's a little scary. Like if you read too much into it, like I am doing right now, it's the idea that if you let it, like if you're not aware of it, that your relationship with your spouse, the person that you have agreed and like it acknowledges the person that you love forever, like you can, without active work, without your energy and involvement, like it can slide into this complacent place where both parties are just kind of living their lives in the same house. And that, like, to me, that was scary. Like the idea that can just happen over time, and that was kind of the thing. They never showed it. They showed like snippets of it, but it was never this decision where Old Miles and his wife didn't love each other anymore. It was just the two of them living together in a normal suburban life, just the normal problems that people have. And they didn't, at some point, one of them or both of them stopped putting in the effort and they slid apart, and it was just so easy. And that's what was scary to me.
So the writers of this show were aware of the fact that while this had a decidedly modern execution, the idea of this is as old as time. And in fact, they even named one of the episodes after this song by Edward Holmes from 1979 called Pina Colada. It kind of came back to prominence because it was in the Guardians of the Galaxy soundtrack. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, I remember. Yeah, we listened to that song. I think it was on the Guardian soundtrack, and I pulled it up on YouTube, a couple years ago when the movie came out, and listened to the lyrics for the very first time. And realized this is a horrible song.
Yeah, and so this plays out almost to a T, but with modern points instead of legacy points. So in 1979, the story is there's a couple that's fallen into this depressed marriage, and so he takes picks up the personal want ads section of the classifieds in the newspaper and sees this exciting ad from a woman who describes this alternate lifestyle that he thinks would be exciting, and he arranges a meeting and goes to meet her, and it turns out to be his wife, and it's this, they laugh it off, but the fact is they were both trying to cheat on the other person.
That's the thing the song never addresses, because the song is upbeat and peppy, and the idea is that they have a laugh over it, and they rediscover each other, and they realize that they are both this kind of person that they're seeking. But the undertone of that is like the hard conversation that you have when you leave the bar. It's like, so wait, you put personals out in the ads, and it's like, you responded to an ad too. Yeah, mm-hmm. That's a more real song. I think that comes later. Is probably a country song.
So there's this point where the clone thinks he's going to actually do it. He's like, okay, I'll just get out of the life. It doesn't belong to me, and I'll just go start a new life. And he goes on this dating website and fills out a dating profile. And I love the way that they execute this in the show. He fills out all the points about what he's attracted to, and it narrows it down, and it comes out with one match.
Yes, which is, in the one match they show is the wife. And then the episode cuts right there, which is, all right, so let's talk about general filmmaking for a second. The film, the show is made spectacularly. The choices that they made in what is going to be shown throughout one episode, how they're going to cut it, how they're going to have the cliffhanger for the next episode, the cinematography, the choices of the camera angles was fantastic. Now, but I will say the sound design was just awful. Like I couldn't, it was bad.
I'm going to agree with you. That it was spotty. The execution, I don't think that all the plot points won with me. All the jokes didn't. I think they also kind of flirted with going back and forth out of deciding if they wanted to be noir or not. And so at times it looked like he was going to murder his other self, or things were going to get dark, and then they just never did. And so they were kind of like playing off the fact that we thought, oh, what's it going to be like if it gets dark? But it mostly just stayed on like spoof comedy kind of thing, even though it was dealing with really hard issues. But I agree with you 100%. The music really took me out of it a lot. I looked through my notes. I'd written down how much I hate music 5 separate times.
So the music it sounded like they took... I feel bad saying this. Like, can I say this on the podcast? We'll edit it out if I can. It sounded like the guy who does all the music on a synthesizer for like porn, like got called up to the big leagues and like, hey, we're going to give you a shot at this show. And he just like was playing this heavy synthesizer, like porn tracks.
It was heavy handed, and it was just really bad.
Yeah.
It's distracting.
Everything else was great.
It can't take away from the performances of the characters and stuff like that. Let me see if I had any others.
I want to, while you're looking at your notes, I want to gush about camera angles, which is a really stupid thing to gush about. But most of the...
So when you pointed it out, I noticed it better, but go ahead.
Okay. So there was... Most of the show is filmed static camera angles. And they try not to do a lot of jumps. Like when there's conversations or whatever, it's like one camera angle, maybe two, that they jump back and forth to. But there was one departure that I can name from all of that. And that was the scene in one of the later episodes where old Miles and his wife are doing that choreographed dance from their wedding, right? And the camera became incredibly dynamic. Like it was moving throughout that entire scene, and the music was swelling in the foreground. And it became very flowing and very elegant. And it was just... like, it's a very subtle difference, but it was very impactful in the way that I viewed that. And that's why, like, it just made that moment, like, so much more pivotal because of the way that they chose to film and show it.
Huh. And so that was to help us feel as the viewer that he was actually starting to effectively transform his life.
Yes. And, like, I only started... this is going to sound stupid, but my... Nicole got her master's degree, and one of the classes that she had to take as an elective was film appreciation. And I feel like I got a lot out of that class while she was taking it, because she would talk about stuff like mise-en-scène, and that's the idea of the feeling of the... like, if you separated from the story, separated from the characters, separated from the dialogue, the choices that you make with the camera and the music and how you're going to film and show the scene that you want to show has a direct impact on how the audience feels without them really knowing it. And so being aware of it allows me to like point to scenes like that and be like, this scene was super well done because you felt like it was super important and you don't even know why.
So we jumped over it a little bit, but there was the decision that she made, and there was two, because the timeline's kind of dotted where we'll watch it as old Miles and then we'll rewind a little bit and watch it as new Miles and then rewind a little bit and watch it as Kate. So there was a scene where we watched it as Kate, where she'd gotten fed up with him. She'd created the dating profile and stuff. And then we rewound and watched it as old Miles. And there was a scene where he was actually starting to pull himself together, not realizing that it was already too late from her perspective.
Yes. And that was like towards the end again. And I mentioned like very briefly, I kept expecting him to pull himself up and like to embrace and be, I can be this guy and start to do it. And that was the scene where, like, yeah, Kate and New Miles had run off and were having some fling and realizing that it didn't work. But it was the scene where he was in his workout gear and he was lacing up his running shoes for the first time in what had to have been years. And, like, they had just a couple of times shown that they used to run and exercise together. And, like, this is it. He's going to turn it around right here.
Huh. That's interesting you picked out that moment because I watched it twice and I don't remember that moment. There was a different moment I keyed in on.
Oh.
And that was when he finally kept his appointment to go to the fertility clinic.
That's
because he'd been putting that off over and over and over.
Yeah. For 2 years, the guy had said.
Yeah.
And that's probably that is also one of those points where you can see like the decisions he's making. He's trying and he's putting the effort back in.
Yeah, he's doing something that's more about their relationship and his commitment to her instead of just focusing on himself, which he admits is his fatal flaw, where he's ended up and what's ruined their marriage. So in that episode where he does keep his appointment in the fertility clinic, then he kind of gets derailed because he finds out that New Miles, who's going to work for a week for him, has this moment where his ad campaign hangs in the balance based on some referendum in some community allowing a telecom install, and he goes down just to watch New Miles' thing fail, and like it's this other person and not himself, he goes to just sit in the crowd and watch it fail so that he can say, your optimism and new energy is doesn't really work.
Well, and that's because he was still holding on to his old identity, right? He didn't want to acknowledge the fact that this other version of him was better.
Yeah. And then because of the circumstances, the way it plays out, he ends up having to defend the referendum and try to influence it positively. And what he does was so cynical and manipulative, and it really offended me. Like, I took it kind of hard. Like, he goes to this group of farmers in a bar in this small town and just makes up these outright lies about his past. Like, he's just one of the guys on the farm. Gets them all on his side. They all go vote in favor of the referendum and it wins. But then Ray the farmer finds out that he lied to them all. And it just felt so bad to me. And then they point out, and Miles points out how is that any different from the ad campaign from this corporate giant pretending that we're your neighbors and friends when all we want to do is install a cell tower in your neighborhood. And I thought, are those two things the same or are they different? What do you think? Do you think going into the community and drinking a beer with them in the bar and lying to them about your childhood is different than brilliant, slick ad campaign showing that you're being their neighbors and friends?
Well, this is getting into like moral and ethical discussions because they're both companies were hired deliberately to manipulate the people that have the decision power in this circumstance. And so the ethical thing is to just explain the pros and cons and let the validity of your argument and your proposition stand on its own. But the reality is that doesn't work because these are people. And so you have to, everybody has to play the game. This is why advertising is an industry. Like, billboards don't just list the pros and cons of their product. They try to make you feel something. They're trying to manipulate you into diverting your resources to them. So what Miles did was probably the epitome of what old Miles did, what old Miles embodies. Like new Miles came up with this ad campaign that was based on connection and friends and just these touchy-feely, these great positive things. And then Miles used a very cynical, world-weary tactic to manipulate the people into making it successful. And so you see the two approaches that the same person takes with different life experiences. And I think that's kind of... that was another catalyzing moment when Ray called him out on it. Like, as everybody was leaving, it was just Ray and Miles. And Ray's like, oh, that was pretty slick, and basically explained that he knew it was all a lie. And you could see the look on Miles's face. Like he didn't feel good about it. This is not something that he's like, whatever, old man, I got the cash, boom. Like, it really did impact him. And I think that contributes more to... Because then later on, like the follow-up from that is he had another one of those deciding moments, right? Like, this thing that I did to justify this ad campaign, do I internalize that and change my character, or do I blame new Miles? Like, this is new Miles' fault for putting me in this situation, and he 100% put that on new Miles.
Yeah.
Well, and this culminates with it was either the last episode or the second to last episode where old Miles finds out not only is new Miles screwing up his career, but new Miles then had this romantic fling with his wife, and he's in a rage, a murderous rage, and drives to the guy's apartment, and he's gonna kill him. And this is where I would one of the moments where I would encourage people that if you're going to watch this show, watch it with your spouse, because the two different perspectives that Nicole and I had watching this was awesome. He's walking into the apartment with an axe. Like, he didn't get a gun, he got an axe, and he's going to go axe murder this guy. And my wife goes like, "Oh, he's going to kill him." And I go, "No, he's not." And she looks at me and I was like, "No, they're going to fight, and then they're going to be fine, because that's how guys are. And the guys that get super mad at each other, they'll beat the tar out of each other, but then it'll be out of their system, and then they'll figure it out." And
okay, but then he walks in and finds the gun on the credenza.
Yes, and what does he do?
Well, did you change your mind at that point?
Nope.
Because they want us to. They want to create false suspense. They want us to think this is going to be a noir. Now it turns into, what do I do with the body?
Well, and it just turned into exactly what I didn't expect it exactly how it played out, but it was funny. Like, it was both impactful and amusing how they did the fight scene, because then old Miles holds up the gun pointing at new Miles, and like the gun starts shaking, he drops like, "I can't do it," and then new Miles starts making fun of him. It's like, "Oh, you can't do anything," and then they just start beating the tar out of each other.
I didn't find that to be as much of a throwaway, the "you can't do anything." So I found the scene where he storms in with murderous rage to kind of represent how I feel towards myself sometimes when I fail.
Oh, no, that is exactly what this scene was. This was one person like confronting himself about these problems in his life and trying to...
That he caused.
Yes, like, this is you.
Where he's both sides of it.
Yes, exactly.
Yes. So, I think about this sometimes where like I'm down on myself, or I'm feeling bad, or I'm feeling guilty or depressed. And if all of a sudden you could take the best part of me out and the worst part of me out, and the two of them could argue about where I'm at in my life, would it look like this? No. What would it be like? What would I say if it was actually out loud instead of just happening inside of me?
I took it a different way. I took it as like old Miles pointing the gun at new Miles, like him, a carbon copy of himself. And like, this is the moment. Like, that is the source of all your problems, and it's you. Are you going to kill that other version of you and acknowledge that you are the problem and then make the changes? Then he couldn't do it. And he could not accept the fact that he was the source of all of his problems.
So you think in that moment he accepted it?
No. The opposite. If he accepted it, he would have killed new Miles and been like, "All right, well, new Miles is dead. I have no one to blame my problems on. I'm going to be better." And he couldn't. Like, he couldn't kill the other version of himself, which I think is a metaphor for like everything that he holds. Like his personality and his memories and his experiences. Like, that is me. I need to kill me in order to move past and change.
You said he couldn't do it when he's pointing the gun, but then about 2 minutes later, he suffocates him with the pillow and actually does kill him.
But then what does he do after that?
And then he gives him CPR. Okay, I love this because I like this in the aspect where like he thought he was going to kill him, and then he didn't, but then he got mad, and then he did kill him, but then he's like, "Oh, what have I done?" And then he brought him back to life. I feel this way with some of my self-inflicted problems sometimes. Like, why did I bring that back to life?
That's exactly what this is. Like, this whole thing is a very, like, just an incredibly well thought out metaphor for how we accept the changes in our own lives. And Paul Rudd did an amazing job embodying that in two characters that were the same person. It was great. Just great. Loved watching it. Sad it's over. Oh, actually, I will say that the ending was a letdown for me. Do we want to?
All right,
let's not spoil the ending.
There's no elegant way to end this.
No, there isn't. But let's just say it was a super happy ending, right? Like from.
So we
Wayne's
kind of
World.
focus on the man a bit, but I want to rewind one episode to the woman when she has her epiphany. So she's made the decision to basically follow through with her when she went on the online dating site and matched up with the clone to agree to a meeting and go off.
Right.
So she has a business trip in the city for a week. And the other Miles was going to be doing something back at the house, and then the clone went with her on the business trip, and they end up in the city together. And after a blissful evening and night together, and then the next morning, and things start to get weird. He's not great in bed. The dance was awkward. The run was awkward. He offers with her to run away to Paris to try to steal her away from New Miles. And it's just not working out. And then she kind of has this moment where she's trying to figure out what the problem is. And she says to him, "I think I've convinced myself in some perverse way that this was an act of love that would save our marriage. But really, all it is just cheating on her husband to make herself feel better about where she ended up." And the new Miles is still trying to win her way. He's like, "I'm not bitter and angry like he is." And she goes, "But I'm bitter and angry." And I realized that this was she was like, I may be kind of mad where I'm at right now, but we got there together. Like, you clone aren't part of this.
Yeah. That was her kind of accepting, like, her role in the whole problems. Like, for up until that point, it was shown that she was kind of blaming old Miles for these issues. Like, even if it was just all passive, like, she kind of blamed Miles that the problems that they were having. And then that was her kind of coming to terms with it. Like you said, it takes two to tango. And so she was like accepting her portion of the responsibility for letting all that go the way that it went.
Yeah, you're right. And then she just says, "I'm sorry, this was a mistake." And she sends him off and goes back. And, it takes a while because some other stuff is going on. But then she just comes clean. She just goes back home and tells old Miles that she cheated on with new Miles, and he flies into his murderous range and brings the whole thing to a conclusion.
which then, it was a great scene, very impactful, the end of it. But they had the mega happy ending, and I wanted to ask you about this ending. So, do you want to see a season 2 of this show?
Well, I agree with your analysis that this was a brilliantly well done way of showing through a fantastical science fiction concept the struggle that happens within us. And I feel like it's kind of complete. Like, if there was this problem in their marriage and they were both blaming the other person, and when they both came to the realization that they were the one that needed to take charge of the fact that they weren't treating the other one well, and then that was what helped heal the marriage and put them on the right track. Like, what's left to do? They're going to have to come up with a new conflict. And to come up with another one that deep and profound would feel kind of artificial. Like, how could there be a season 2?
Right. And that was kind of my point, is I feel like they've explored this space, and I really hope they don't keep doing it. What I would like them to do is what they've done in other series, which is genius. Like with, I think Stranger Things or American Horror Story does this. Like, keep the series going, but jump cut to new characters, new situation, same kind of twist that's going on. Like, I get it. I would love
just have someone else that went to this strip mall and dropped $50,000 to get a new clone.
Yes, and the same kind of thing happens, but then they explore a different aspect. Because this one, they kind of explored like the marriage aspect very, very well, and is so good that I don't want a season 2 with Paul Rudd and Kate, because like I feel like what needs to be said has been said. Like, have completely new characters in a new situation and explore a different aspect of coming to grips with yourself.
I love it. That's a brilliant idea. I hope the creators are listening. And if they aren't, let's see. I'm going to say their names so that then if they're listening. So it was created by Timothy Greenberg, is the writer. So Timothy, if you're listening, Josh's idea is a brilliant one. Don't just make a season 2. Paul Rudd is as awesome as he is. You'd be doing a disservice. So I got to tell you something. When I was trying to write up my notes, I went on Wikipedia and looked at the article that was up there, and somebody created a table like there often is with these series where it has all the episodes listed out and then plot summaries of them. Mm-hmm. And I don't know why, but there was summaries written for 5 of the 8 episodes. And I looked at it, and my inner OCD kicked in, and I was like, "Oh my gosh!"
Oh no, you didn't.
So I totally did. I wrote the Wikipedia article for episodes 5, 6, and 7.
Oh,
so
man.
if you go on the Wikipedia site, I'm the one that wrote the plot summaries for episodes 5, 6, and 7.
All right, listeners, this is just one more example of Ben Rich making the universe a better place just by being.
I couldn't take it, Josh. It was too much.
That's outstanding. I want to ask you a very non-related, silly question.
Go ahead.
Okay, so this whole series revolves around Miles, a clone of Miles, and his wife and their relationship, right? Right. How many times did you have the conversation with your wife about having a threesome with yourself?
Okay. I'm glad that didn't come up in the show. That would have been awkward. Here's the thing, and I died inside a little bit, and I know my wife is going to listen to this, but here's what I want to say. I was a little bit jealous of you when I brought this up with you, and you immediately, when I looked at your notes, it was obvious to me that you were experiencing this together with your wife.
Aww.
Because my wife and I have just, over the 20 years, we've just realized our tastes for fiction are so different that most of the time we experience most things separately. And so I was a little bit envious of the fact that I asked you to do this, and you went and asked her to watch it with you, and you just experienced it together and enjoyed it together. Because I kind of asked Alicia to watch it with me, and she was kind of like, nah, and that was it. It was over.
I'll tell you right now that I'm not supposed to speak for Nicole because I usually do it wrong. But I guarantee if she was in this room having this conversation with us right now, she would tell you she did not watch this show because I asked her to. She watched this show because Paul Rudd was in it.
Okay. And with that in mind, we're well over our time, and I think we've reached a good stopping point for today.
I think so. Oh, and spoiler alert for anybody that wants to watch the show that hasn't.
Well, you can't give the spoiler alerts at the end. I'll have to go back and edit that into the beginning. I hope that's well known by this point.
Yeah,
we spoil lots of stuff on this show.
Yeah, we're going to talk about a TV show, and there's no way we're going to talk about it without spoiling every episode.
If you don't want to know what happens in the Star Wars prequels, don't listen to this podcast.
They're awful.
Well, Josh, like I mentioned, I've had some great experiences interacting with our listeners, and so we've tried to create enough places for our listeners to go out there and interact with us. So if you haven't already, please like our page, Bad at Magic, on Facebook. Like us on iTunes, put up a review, go to our website, and we're adding to the pantheon of places you can interact with the Bad at Magic podcast, reddit.com. So if you go to reddit.com/r/badatmagic, we'll create a thread there where you can go on and if anonymously, if you so choose, or at least in a threaded way, interact with the episode, talk about your ideas, things that came up in your mind, other concepts you think you want us to touch on.
Yeah, if you have never used Reddit before, it's probably a more robust platform for ongoing discussions than Facebook is. Facebook keeps constantly shifting what they want to show you and how they're going to show it to you. Reddit is much more focused on comments and people interacting about certain things. So if you want to have a back and forth about anything that we're talking about, or if you want to give us more in-depth feedback or critiques, or ask us to talk about specific things or go into other topics, that's probably a better place to do it.
Okay. So thanks to our listeners. Please like us on your favorite podcast platform on Facebook, and now you can interact with us on Reddit. We had written down that we were going to talk about the cultural phenomenon that had happened in the internet relating to Sonic the Hedgehog. We'll have to save that for next time.
Oh, man, I really want to talk about that.
I know. Well, it's going to have to wait, and maybe there'll be new news, but it's not going to change between now and next time. And yeah, so thanks for listening.